Now we turn to Natlie Lorino and Professor Anita August. She teaches English here at Sacred Heart University and is an advocate for social justice issues.
Welcome, Professor August. It's wonderful to have you here today. How are you?
Great. Thank you for having me.
So let's talk first about media and how outlets, news outlets, mainstream corporate-owned mainstream outlets, talk about social justice issues, and what's your observations on how they portray them?
Well, I think it's important for us to consider what type of medium you're talking about. If you're talking about the big networks, then all of them are doing a miserable job as far as I'm concerned. Social justice issues typically arise or bottom-up revolutions or rebellions, so to speak. And most of the media outlets, as you've said, I think you said like six, they're on like six people or six groups that own all of them. So I don't know if the message or the ideas of the groups are actually being filtered down or at least exposed in the visible manner in which they should. For instance, if you look at Fox News, they're going to portray like the Black Lives Matter campaign in a totally different way than I would say MSNBC or CNN. Now, the irony of that is that CNN and MSNBC believe that they are actually reporting truth, you know. But if you talk to the Black Lives Matter movement people, that's not the truth that they want. So it becomes a question of whose truth is being portrayed.
Exactly.
Whose truth is being portrayed.
And it's really interesting because conservative news outlets like Fox News are typically under a lot of scrutiny, especially from groups like the Black Lives Matter movement, about how they talk about it. And that's when the aspect of what journalism bullshit comes into play, because there's a lot of agenda setting, there's a lot of spin. But at the same rate, news outlets like MSNBC, obviously they're a little bit more liberal, a little bit more objective. But if they're both owned by the same big six corporations, is there really a difference in agenda when you come down to it?
Well, I think it's not as wide as we'd like for it to be, or at least from my perception of it. I'd like to see more and more, but who's you know, it's very profit driven, and so I can understand that on some level. But also when we talk about movements like Black Lives Matter, issues related to women, issues of justice, and not just issues of race, but gender, class, all of those issues, we don't see them. And who's really interested in the story? So we have to be careful about that as well. How you generate that type of knowledge, who's generating that knowledge, and does it get to the audiences that's needed, you know? So we have a lot of poverty issues in our country right now. We have an election, and I'm not sure I don't think any of them are really talking about that, you know, the issues of poverty and how they intersect one another, race, gender, and class.
And talking about rhetoric and how like the news perpetuates certain stigmas or stereotypes, we definitely see that, I feel, in mainstream news outlets, how these certain like visual and symbolic meanings kind of continue to be embedded in our society and the way they portray social justice issues, or like the lack of portrayal.
Absolutely. I mean, our knowledge is mediated through visual imagery. And if you constantly are seeing a certain group of people or a certain gender portrayed in a certain manner, then you are being socially constructed to think that this is the way all of that group is. For instance, if you ever noticed on television, you rarely see a person of color, an Asian person or an Indian person, or a person with a disabled body as the expert knowledge. It's typically a white male. So we have been visually constructed to see knowledge and expert knowledge as coming through white males, and so we've got to change that.
And how do we change that?
Well, we can start by having more and more people of color, more women in positions of power where they can make changes like that. And they can actually start to call women and again, people of color and maybe people with disabled bodies who are experts in those chosen fields, and not always turn to white males as the vessel, as the generators of expert knowledge. There are a lot of us out there. I mean, what you guys are doing, you're having a wide variety of people doing this program, and I think it's important for people to see that.
And talking back again about the Black Lives Matter movement, people who are, I mean, everyone should be interested in social justice issues, obviously, but for people that are kind of getting into it, like, where should we seek our news?
Well, I think the best place to do it is online or in cyberspace, because you're going to get the citizen, you know, you're going to get the typical citizen who's going to go out there and take their camera. And, of course, we all have biases, but it's not for profit. You know, you got to get the typical citizen who's going to go out there and take their camera. And, of course, we all have biases, but it's not for profit. You know, you got to get the typical citizen who's going to go out there and take their camera. And, of course, we all have biases, but it's not for profit. You know, you got to get the typical citizen who's going to go out there and take their camera. And, of course, we all have biases, but it's not for profit. You know, you got to get the typical citizen who's going to go out there and take their camera. And, of course, we all have biases, but it's not for profit. You know, you got to get the typical citizen who's going to go out there and take their camera. And, of course, we all have biases, but it's not for profit. You know, you got to get the typical citizen who's going to go out there and take their camera. And, of course, we all have biases, but it's not for profit. You know, you got to get the typical citizen who's going to go out there and take their camera. And, of course, we all have biases, but it's not for profit. You know, And that's one of the
key,
biggest
yeah.
things right there. It's not for profit. And these citizen educators out there, they're like the best people in the world to do it. I mean, we can actually see movements start a rise, giving birth through social media that way. And that's what happens with the Black Lives Matter. We saw it. We saw it grow in social media. And by the time it got to the networks, it had been cleansed, of everything that was so beautiful about it. The immediacy, the people on the street who had their cameras and who did not filter it. They gave us. That's what truth is really. That lived reality. So I think we have to start. I think cyber technology has really helped all of us, made us more aware of our responsibility as citizens. You don't have to be an elected official to get out there and participate in your neighborhoods and in the community and how this country is being shaped. We all have a responsibility to do it.
And I guess that's kind of like how we start or talk about these, not even just talk about them, raise awareness, but actually take action, is by making the effort to kind of shift through, Google and see what you find. I mean, there are a lot of like defamatory things online.
Sure.
But then again, we see in, mainstream news outlets kind of the same type of thing happening, because you had the one end, Fox News, where they don't really portray Black Lives Matter as the way the movement should be, or that it tries to advocate for. But then you have like MSNBC and perhaps CNN, who don't talk about them enough.
Right.
Even when they do, it's still not, maybe not defaming them, but it's not acclaiming them the way that the movement seeks.
Sure. I mean, and again, that's why it's important to have different media outlets, more than just the top six, and maybe not for profit. I mean, the Feminist Wire, I think that's a group. None of those women work. I mean, they get paid to create that that journal, but they work very hard, and they're doing some great things with really igniting a conversation about feminist issues, and not just feminist issues, but issues around transgendered people, poverty, class, and how they're all interconnected. They don't get paid 1 cent, and I think it's just marvelous what they're doing. And so we need more and more groups like that who are not for profit, and the only profit they get is just making the citizenry a better place for all of us. That is the profit right there.
Yeah, I mean, it is really interesting how like there are so many of these underground movements that get perpetuated by underground news media.
Right.
But it's unfortunate that like most of the consumers of knowledge, like in America, they're only looking at CNN, they're only looking at Fox News. So it's almost frustrating for someone who is interested in social justice issues like yourself, for like, I'm assuming that people don't seek it out because they can't. It's not there.
We don't know where to
think of
look.
it to look on the internet or figure things out.
Right. You don't. But that's how we've been groomed. We've been coached to think that that's where the news starts, and it just doesn't start there. That's probably the last place if you want to be informed, and informed in a way where it can be liberating. They're probably, the big networks are probably the last place you should look. You should look in your neighborhoods. You should and talk.
Yeah.
So social media is like the best thing. Go on Facebook. Go on Twitter. Go in those spaces. The problem with that is we still have a digital divide in our culture. What about the more senior members of our society? They may not have as much access as some of us who are younger. So we have to do that. So we have this kind of knowledge gap that's taking place as well. But I would encourage everyone, if you are looking for news, and news that, again, is liberating, and it's going to help the cultures that we live in, because we all live in one culture. The big six networks are like the last place to go. Don't do it.
We don't think of it because we're conditioned
Absolutely.
since birth, since we're out there with our families, watching TV after dinner, or in the morning, like we are conditioned that this is news and that's it. But it's not really the reality.
Well, it's certainly filtered through a certain lens, and of course the ones on social media. But I think if you look at more sites on social media, you have more outlets.
I think that social media in general is so imperative to learning about these issues. I know for myself, like Twitter has like hashtags, you see on Tumblr, Instagram, like you see people talking about it, and it's really like mind-blowing how impactful social media has been in recent years. But I don't think imagine if Black Lives Matter had the same traction for like during the times of the 60s.
Right.
With if the social media was around back then, like how different things could have been.
Oh my gosh, things would have changed. I think about that. What about the Black Panthers, the women's movement, how that could have changed so much. And I think because we have social media right now, a lot of things are changing much faster than they probably would have without social media. So that's a great thing, but we've got to be careful whose hands is in. We just can't locate it in just the hands of a few people. Everybody should become a reporter. Everybody, and we
I
are.
think that's our jobs as citizens.
Absolutely, it's
Well,
our job.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for us today. It's been wonderful talking to you and hearing your insight on these very important issues.
And now to Mary in the studio with our 2-minute weather report.